Hello, I'm John David Ebert, and welcome to Understanding Contemporary Art. We're finishing up a discussion on Anselm Kiefer here. Long about somewhere in 92, 93, Kiefer purchased some land outside of the town of Barjac in France. And it was an old abandoned silkworm factory. And he purchased this land, something like 30 hectares, with 47 different buildings in it. It was abandoned. But he didn't really start working it in earnest until around the year 2000. And then he went in and then created this Gesamtkunstwerk, and I think that he named it La Rabote. And I think that it essentially constitutes his magnum opus. It is a Gesamtkunstwerk, but it is also a magnum opus, a sort of apparatus of capture for all of his previous works. He just dumps them all in there. And what we find is, when we look at it, is it's a world of shattered forms, shattered glass, broken pottery vessels, underground tunnels, stacks of sculptured disused books, sculpted books, broken forms, ruined things. And so I think the key thing about La Rabote, and here's an image of it from afar. This is a view of it. It's not a very impressive view, but when you get down into it, here's an image of one of the rooms, one of the tunnels with the broken forms, and this is another view on the inside of it. It's a world of shattered forms, and I think the interesting thing about it is that it indicates that a shift has now taken place in the ontological status of the artist. Traditionally, the artist was a maker of forms, not a decimator of them or a chronicler of their disintegration, which I think is what Kiefer is revealed in at Barjac as. He is now the chronicler of the disintegration of forms into a vast metaphysical junkyard, the midden heap of the West. Here's another image of one of the underground rooms, and here's Kiefer working on one of the paintings, which he has down like Jackson Pollock on the floor. He has said that of his artwork that each one of them conceals a Jackson Pollock somewhere underneath, and so we can really see the influence of Pollock's drip paintings going all the way through contemporary art here. But here he is, and this is an interesting image. This is from Sophie Fiennes' excellent documentary, Over Your City's Grass Will Grow, one of the best art documentaries I think ever made on Kiefer. This is him standing with a blowtorch, melting some probably lead, and getting ready to pour it onto one of the canvases. Here, this image is the giveaway. The artist with a blowtorch is a new thing now in the history of art. The artist, if we look back through the entire history of the art, the artist is the one who is the creator of forms like Daedalus, who makes the wings and the various objects for King Minos, or Cain, who is the fashioner of the world's first cities, or Vulcan, who makes all the hammers and implements of war for the gods, for them to go to battle with, or Prometheus, who steals the fire, and this is a very Promethean image here, who steals the fire from the gods to bring it to men so that men can create forms. The artist is the one who is traditionally the path breaker, the one who makes new forms, who invents new technologies with which to create new forms. But here now, instead of the artist with his paintbrush and palette, we have the artist, or even with, in the case of Jackson Pollock, with the dipstick and the paint can, we have him with a blowtorch. And so I think this reveals that something drastic has happened to the artist in contemporary art. He's a chronicler of the disintegration of the transcendental signifieds that have collapsed into a vast metaphysical junkyard. Now, throughout this series, I have referred to contemporary art as a post-catastrophic art that involves fishing signifiers out of the broken midden heap. But there's a whole history to the midden heap. If we look back through it, we can see that Plato was essentially, I think, as Marshall McLuhan pointed out, the first to create a junk heap out of scrapping the entire world of becoming and junking it into his cave, along with the whole oral tribal world going all the way back to the Paleolithic that implies. He junks that whole world, and that's the first midden heap, essentially, at the start of the metaphysical age. And so the metaphysical age, which was a simultaneous creation of the Greeks and the Jews, was created from out of scrapping the mythological age or the pre-metaphysical age that comes before it. We can see that with the Hebrews, who at the same time are scrapping the entire world of the Mesopotamians and the Egyptians, delegitimizing their technologies. They caricaturize the Mesopotamian ziggurats, for instance, with the Tower of Babel. They have the two fathers, Abraham, who comes from the city of the moon god Ur, and Moses, who comes from Egypt. But they come from those societies as nomads, as floating signifiers that have broken free out onto the plane of nomadology, the smooth space, and they've left the striated realm of the ancient civilizations of Egypt and Mesopotamia behind, scrapping them basically into a junk heap. So the metaphysical age begins from out of this scrapping of the mythological age into a junk heap, and then the metaphysical age cycles through its course. We get the Christians who scrap the entire world of pagan antiquity, especially in the 4th century under Theodosius the Great, who long about 390-391 delegitimized and made illegal the practice of closed down the Olympic Games, shut down the temple to the Vestal Virgins. All these things were shut down. That's the last century in which the Egyptians are unable to write in hieroglyphs, which is scrapped and displaced now by the new Hebrew invention, the Semitic invention of the alphabet. And so there's another scrapping, another cultural cycle that's built on another scrapping of another age. Then during the Renaissance, we get a kind of negentropic reversal of this, where the artists are all fishing forms out of the scrap heap of antiquity. We get, the Laocoon is dug up in 1506, and it becomes the inspiration for the later works of Michelangelo. The texts of the Corpus Hermeticum and the writings of Plato and Plotinus are brought over by refugee Greek monks who are chased out of the city of Constantinople after the Ottoman Turks invaded. Those monks go to places like Florence and Rome, where they bring these texts, these long-lost texts with them. And there begins, with the establishment of humanism and negentropic reversal of the midden heap of antiquity, a sifting and sorting that leads to the great creation of a new art cycle that begins the perspectival age of art with the Renaissance, and that goes all the way down to the 19th century. Whereupon, about the turn of that century, right about 1911, 1912, we get Carl Jung's creation of a midden heap. He scraps the entire world of both the metaphysical and the pre-metaphysical ages, the mythological ages, into his archetypes of the collective unconscious. The collective unconscious is, of course, his vast midden heap into which all the ancient archetypes are tossed, like long-lost Greek statues that are tossed into the rubbish pile. So we get that, and then later with Derrida, we get of grammatology a scrapping of all the metaphysical texts of Rousseau and Hegel, Plato, and even Heidegger, are all scrapped and thrown onto the junk pile of deconstruction, and he creates in grammatology his own metaphysical scrap heap. And I think that that's what we can see here with Kiefer. Here's a pile of his lead books, which represent the text now that built and especially the Codex, which is the book with the spine that the Christians brought in. They borrowed it from the Romans, but it became the essential Christian text that became the basis for the book in the latter half of the metaphysical age that led to the printed book eventually, the book with the spine that displaced the scroll, the papyrus or the vellum scroll, and became the central text that built the entire civilization, that laid the atrocities for things like the myth of Indo-Aryan supremacy and racial degeneracy and racial hygiene, and the atrocities and horrors that led to the concentration camps of World War II that brought about the apocalypse that created a new midden heap of scrapped grand meta-narratives. And here's another image from Barjac. This is one of his collections of lead books with panes of glass. And all over the floor you can see he's shattered shards of glass that are all over the floor here that show, that are an illustration, of course, of his appropriation of the Jewish myth of the breaking of the vessels, the Shevarat HaKalim, in which the vessels are not strong enough to receive the primordial light, which is too strong for them, and it shatters them, and it allows evil and imperfection to enter into creation. But here, of course, he's reinscribing that into the collapsed and deconstructed age of the transcendental signifieds of the metaphysical age of the West, in which the vessels there are the transcendental signifieds that have now broken and shattered into the midden heap. They're all over the place. And I think here these little towers of Babel that he's created on the property at La Rabote are very interesting structures that are sort of, in a certain way, they forecast the gloomy coming end of Western civilization, when some nomads might come one day upon the ruins of our cities and make their campfires in the ruins of our cities, where grass will grow over them, as inevitably will be the case one day. And they will camp out in the ruins of skyscrapers that will indeed recapitulate the myth of the Tower of Babel on the turn of the spiral at the end of another age. And so, in an interesting sense, this Kiefer's art is an art that is not pregnant with the future. It is an art that is directed back toward the past. He's gobbling up all the metaphysical signifieds and signifiers, throwing them into the midden heap at La Rabote, but there is also a certain sense in which it's pregnant with the future, in the sense that it may be a forecasting of the ghost cities that will eventually populate the landscapes of our current Western civilization that will eventually begin over the next century or two producing ghost metropolises.